beautiful people, and welcome to the Occult Explorers. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined today by my dear friend and co-host Dion and our special guest Shay. How's it going,
Hey.
guys?
Hi, very happy to
Awesome.
be here.
Amazing, amazing. So good to be here with you guys. Absolutely lovely. And we're here for our fourth part of our deep dive into the Gothic subculture and its connection to magic and the occult. So, Dion, what do you have in store for us for today? So you've been working on a presentation for us. What do you want to introduce to Shay and I, and give us a bit of a recap about where we've been?
Oh, well, we've been traversing from the 1950s, the 1980s. We started originally at the Bat Cave
Right.
in England, talking about Susie and the Banshees and Gothic culture. And we weaved our way down to vampire films and Nosferatu and where did the vampire myth come from in Gothic culture. Last time, and we talked about Coco Chanel, the little black dress.
Right.
Earlier vampire myths, the 1800s in Europe. Just a lot of fascinating ways to connect what we'll call the shadow side or the dark feminine through history. Because I've been noticing that the feminine is a big part of this. That's what I was telling you off camera. You know, as we study these stories, we see that a lot of these Gothic characters are women through paintings and literature and what have you.
Right. It's either the women are the inspiration, or they're the creative actors who are challenging society, right? And yeah, this is so fun. What is your perspective so far on all of this goth stuff, Shay?
Oh, I mean, I was a little goth before it was really cool to be goth. So, and a lot of, I was even at a party yesterday talking about this podcast to a group of goth people, and they weren't aware that their history goes back 300 years.
Right.
And we started talking about all of the influences, and they were like, of course, of course. But I think it is a rebellion, and positive changes to society have always come from the rebels, and a large part of it is throwing off that patriarchal that has been put there by the church. So you see this rebellion against the church, a rebellion against the patriarchy. It literally, in many cases, does start as an underground movement to hide so that they're not persecuted by the patriarchy, and then it becomes integrated into society. And that's really what mainstream goth culture is all about, integrating that part of society we won't look at because of our mores that have been put there by the church. And
Right. And it's just wild to see that there, we tend to think that things have always, things were so much more conservative in the past. People were so much more religious and were so much more bound down, and everything was much more right. These kind of ideas are new. Goth is something, it's but when we go to the literary roots, when we go to the myths, when we go to these figures across history, we see the same kind of flair, the same kind of ideas. There's a direct correlation, right? And you're right. It's that rebel spark. It's this fascination with death, with the occult, with the alternative. And it is a celebration of that which is marginalized and made outside,
Yeah.
And it's almost an inversion, right? Like there's an element of satire and magic in the sense of we're going to reclaim that which is vilified and presented as beautiful and as artistic, right?
Yeah. What, how dare they say we're not allowed? How
Right.
dare they
How dare
say
they
that?
do that?
How dare
You
they
know,
judge us for this? So let's put it right in their faces, which is
right?
what
And
Goth does. Goth culture does that.
oh,
Yeah.
so much, so much. All these kind of subcultures do, but the Gothic
Mhm,
one is interesting because it's so deeply connected
mhm.
to this kind of occult, magic, literary sort of trend that we can really trace. Like we were talking about previous episodes, Lord Byron and Mary Shelley, right? Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Baudelaire, and we're
Mhm.
only going deeper now. And what's wild too is the deeper we go into history, that you start to see like things get more intense in some ways, more
Yeah.
extreme
Yeah.
rather than less. There's
It
fewer
makes you
people,
it really,
right?
really makes you respect your great grandmother. We'll never
Right.
be as cool as they were.
You'll never be as cool as they were, right? And well, also you see, right? Like we talked about Marquis de Sade, we see this like when we have to remember when we're dealing with this culture, we're dealing with a culture that's born out of Europe and it is a reaction to extreme Christendom. Like we have a hard time in our modern society imagining a religiously closed society, a society where there isn't any kind of free language. But that's the world these people are living in, where there isn't access to literature, where all of this stuff is beyond magical. You get a hidden book or a hidden painting or a little black dress, and it's everything, right?
Oh, and but it's not in our society. I mean, that's what I
Right.
came out of. I came
Right,
out
true.
of, I did a really extreme religion, and I did enough study within that to earn a doctorate in theology. But because I was a woman, I wasn't even allowed to speak. It still happens. And
Yeah,
I wasn't allowed to have tertiary education or any of that. So when I came out, not only did I go through a sexual revolution, sorry guys, but I did. I apologize to all those men. But I also went through this consumption of academia and history and everything that we weren't allowed and weren't taught. And I think a lot of people that turn to the Goth and pagan cultures, it is a reaction to that restriction that you raised.
There's this, there's that rebel spirit, and there's this sense of, if you tell me I'm not, I'm going to. And what is it really that bad? Right? Like, if you're saying it's so horrific, it's so ugly, why? It just intrigues and entices people even more. And it leads to, we talked about this a bit, but I honestly believe that, like, the extremes of libertine ideas and what we see with the extremes of the left-hand path, like the absolute pursuit of ecstasy and decadence at the cost of life, this kind of extremism is born as a direct reaction to Catholicism. You would not see that kind of level of intensity without this deep vilification of sex and this obsession with creating the demonic. Like, the Catholics and the Christian Protestants give birth to the demons,
Exactly. You go back in culture, you go back to the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and there were no demons per se.
There were scary things, right?
Yeah,
they come and they may give you a miscarriage, right? Or take your child's semen or something.
But it's the life force energy of what causes that, and it's part of life. It's not the hidden side. There are so many Liliths and Pazuzus and those, they were part of everybody's daily life. They weren't
true.
Yeah. But it's physics. If you restrict something, it's going to expand. You throw a ball down, it bounces back the other way. So, to not understand this is part of physics, and this is what was going to happen. I think that the manipulators of society are starting to get that today. And I think a lot of their over permissiveness, on pushing culture this way, is to get the reaction that people will come back and be more conservative. So,
well, I mean, a student of history, I just look at our current moment and I go, who is allowing people to be free? Who is allowing people to do business, to speak freely, to be open? That's the group that's going to win. The people who are trying to repress and saying and trying to tell you what to do and what to think, they may have the power in the moment, but they will not hold on to it.
Yes. And
it always creates a backlash.
Yeah, and we have to be aware that push with woke culture, when they're pushing so far in that direction, that there is a backlash to it.
Absolutely.
And is that deliberate? Are they pushing to try and get us more in the middle rather than just let things be, so we can even out, the waves will even out naturally and the balance will return. Yeah.
Well, all of that stuff gets weird because, some of it is organic, some of it is not. And it gets into the deep, people have a strong reaction because it gets into the deeply magical. As soon as you start dictating how people can speak, right? Speech colors your perception and your reality, right? This is also why, like, soon as you start dictating that and challenging that, people are going to flip, right? For good or for bad, it's going to cause an intense reaction, But yeah, I don't know. It's all wild to think about. But in terms of this goth stuff, we're going to see this on full display. Like, Dion, which today is going to bring us to this lady. I'm not sure if you're aware. Are you aware of the witch La Voisin from Paris?
Hang on. There's some amazing witches from Paris, and sometimes I
Right.
get more confused. Is this the one from the 1700s that was in
She's
the court of the king? Yeah,
so she
Yep.
was
yeah,
a mafia boss. Okay, so her story is wild
yeah.
because she was a fortune teller,
Mhm,
but was always a charlatan and always admitted it. Like she
mhm.
was in it for the money and for blackmail. But what she does is she creates a whole mafia organization and
Mhm.
becomes like the real underground power of Paris at this time.
Yeah.
Well, we're in the 17th century where there's this libertine reactionism and there's this noble decadence happening at the same time. Well,
Mhm.
she exploits it. What does the Christian nobility want? They want power and they want fear and they want to go and indulge in the dark. So she
Yeah.
starts putting on black masses for people.
Yeah. This is the one I
And
was
what
thinking.
this
Yeah.
is she was also, so what it would be, she'd be helping these noble women have abortions. So then she'd be collecting the fetuses,
Yes.
then using them in these black masses, paying these priests, and having this grandiose display of the grotesque and decadence for these nobles who were paying her because they believed that this would give them the power of immortality or what have you.
Yeah.
And all of this gets revealed to the public. But the wild part is the woman who orchestrated it didn't believe in any of it. And it was all for money. And it just shows me, it's like, prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt. As soon as you vilify this stuff, someone will come and exploit it. And we see
Yeah.
the same thing happening like today. Like if you go to Africa, you get all these witch doctors. All of that is mostly rich Westerners going to Africa because they want power, money, and those witch doctors, they're not real witch doctors. They're out for money. And
Oh,
it's just that decadence, you know?
I had to take a case to The Hague,
Oh, wow.
about there's electric Christian cults over in West Africa at the moment, Ghana and places like that. And they estimate just in 3 provinces, there's 300,000 children a year being killed being accused of
Jeez.
witches.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So there is, so there, and these groups will get the electric church happening, and all of a sudden, all right, and we're going to cast Satan out of our church, and Satan's in that 2-year-old over there, unless you pay us a year's wage to preserve your child for an exorcism. And some of the parents can't, so, and they do pick on these parents that can't afford it. And some of the kids are lucky enough to be able to run away, and they've set up these places for these kids to run away. They can never go back to their communities again because they've been accused of being witches. So we were over there going, we took over this plea to The Hague to please interfere, and we got lovely letters back, and it really, since we've been over there with it, it has calmed down a lot. It hasn't disappeared. So
No.
we're talking, we talk about these things as if they are in the past. They're not. It's still happening today. It's still happening today. Yeah.
Right.
I went to Ghana years ago.
Mhm.
I was in Ghana in 1994. And same thing. Yeah, they're weaponizing Christianity.
Yeah.
And along with voodoo too. And it was happening there because it's really you can call it whatever religion. It could be Islam, Christianity, but they still have that MLM marketing on it. You got to sacrifice, control. It's voodoo. It's still voodoo. It comes down to manipulating people. Yeah,
for the
yeah.
dollars. Yeah. So, and it's very sad when that happens. So, and we were very lucky in Australia. One of the founders wanted to, and without getting too, I know it's a public forum, we can't name names, but there is somebody who's been putting conspiracy theories out there about lizard people for a couple of decades, a man that I've actually confronted a couple of times, and they based a lot of their theories on this man's, a lot of the Christian theories on what this man says. And when I confronted him, he just went, "Hey, love, how much money did you make today coming to try and tell me about this truth?" It's just like, and I'm sure people know who I'm talking about because I've spoken about it many times. The bottom line is these people create fear for dollars.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the goth culture is a real rebellion against all of that. Let's put the fear out there and show people there's nothing to fear. I might wear
Let's make it
black and
kitsch
use
and fun.
eyeliner, but hey, I'll be the first one to jump in and help you if you've got a problem, which is and most
Right. Yeah.
really,
Embrace the fear, embrace the
yeah.
darkness. That's what this is about, is dispelling our shadow side, because each one of us has a shadow.
Mhm.
Yep. And we all have to confront the shadow.
And
Yeah.
sooner or later.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So Dion, where are we going today? What do you got for your presentation here? Oop, let me just
Well,
bring it.
first, I'd like to tell everyone, if you could, we love it if you could like, subscribe, leave some comments, share this with your folks if you see something of interest in it. And, here we're going to start like with Coco Chanel, taking it back to like the 20s, the Bauhaus and surrealism and different movements. And here's another designer that, I'll let you describe her, Elsa.
Yeah. So this is Elsa Schiappelli, and she was a really radical designer in her day, contemporary of Coco Chanel, as we said, right? A Parisian fashionista who became really connected to the high art world of her day. She collaborated with Salvador Dali, with Man Ray, with Jacques Cousteau, like all of the big names. And she was doing a lot of radical magical stuff right from very early on. So one of the things that's interesting with her, she was highly educated. Her family was well read, and she actually in her early age worked as a poet. So I wanted to show you guys this. This is a dress she made with Salvador Dali, and this is called the Black Skeleton Dress. And this was made for these wild parties that they used to throw, where it would all be these costume gowns. And Dali was notorious. Everyone would be dressed in black for these parties. And this was the dress that she designed for one of these. And this is the poetry collection that she wrote in her youth. So when she was about 16, she wrote this. And this is all Greek and Latin inspired erotic poetry. So it's a lot of celebration of the muse, and it's a lot of celebration of sexuality, very sapphic. And it caused a whole radical response from her family. She published this in 1911, and it largely is destroyed.
But it's still in popular culture. The
No.
the school of the witches from The Witcher,
Mhm.
Arethusa. It's called
Right.
Arethusa. Yeah. So it's still
That's
there.
amazing.
So yeah. Mhm.
Right. All of this stuff is right. We're all going back to the same Greek roots, right?
Mhm.
It's really wild when you see it. And it's just it's this is why I'm so into this kind of Greek kind of magic and whatnot, because it can all unite us, right? Like I hear that and I immediately know we're talking about one of the Nereids. We're talking about one of the daughters of Nereus, right? And she's connected to the river god Alpheus and Artemis, and it's like, I can immediately get into that world. And there's a really importance about having this kind of a lingua franca, and it's a magical one. It connects us to these spirits, like that's what I personally believe. But I was just so impressed that she was doing this.
Well, and one thing, if I could say, I don't know if you'll mention, is like Coco Chanel. Remember, she had loss. The mother died, and she was sent to a convent, and that's where she learned how to sew.
And so does this person as well. I forgot. Yeah. So what happens here is similar kind of story to Coco Chanel. So Elsa, after writing this, is sent to a convent. And while at the convent, she learns how to sew. So the two of the greatest fashionistas of that time in the 20s Paris both learned it from nuns, and from having to go through that religious upbringing, and then they rebelled against it, which is kind of wild, right?
So, but Schiaparelli is still a fashion house. It still exists.
It still exists, and exactly, her kids are still famous actors. It's still going. All this
mostly,
stuff, right?
beautiful underwear is what they're famous for. This beautiful, like you. I remember my very first wealthy boyfriend was like, "Oh, you're not a lady unless you've got Schiaparelli underwear."
Schiaparelli.
So they used to buy me all this Schiaparelli underwear.
What do we got going here, Dion?
Oh, this painting is so wild. There's a lot going on. Most of all, there's some geometry going on in there. I remember before back in the day with our friend Ryan Seven, we would talk about angles.
Right.
How you could get the golden triangle, or as well elliptical angles, dealing with astrology and what we'll call the orbit, the equinox and equinoxes of the planet.
Right.
Here you'll notice that the light, you'll have the young child pointing and focused the angle down to the ground. And if people could zoom or look in, there's a card layout there on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like for you to tell the story, because you told me what your thoughts on it were the other day, and I really like it.
Okay, so this painting, when you showed it to me, immediately blew me away. So first off, we got to immediately recognize the Christian inversion here, right? This is a very famous kind of artistic scene where the mother takes Christ off the cross and is holding him, and you'll see this kind of image replicated countless times within the tradition. So there's a clear inversion of the Christian image. And why I say this is an inversion, we're dealing with circus people, but we're also dealing with probably gypsies, is my guess, that they're trying to signify that this woman is a gypsy based upon the cards and upon her hair and the beads in her earring. And often circus folk would have been gypsies. So, and they would have been regarded as pagan outsiders at this time in Europe, right? And she is doing a magical tarot spread, and she has a dog who's trying to get her attention, and she has next to her an owl. So those symbols immediately stood out to me, and I think what happened is this child died as a result of the mother forcing the child to perform, even though she knew that something bad was going to happen. I think that what this is showing us is this is very much in that imagery of the mother of Jesus, right? Where she knew that Jesus was going to die, and she knew that her child was going to die based upon the cards, based upon the dog and the owl, right? These are symbols of wisdom and of knowledge. And she didn't do anything to prevent it. She allowed it to happen. And now she has to deal with the result, the death of innocence, right? And she's in that robe of the mother, and we have the father on the other side. And it's weird is that, the father is wearing the red, right? Which is the sacred color of blood, and is in that red and the gold, which is also connected to the saffron and to a lot of this kind of stuff. He has the white, pale face, but it almost is like, fish-like. And to me, this seems like going back to the primordial kind of deities here. We're having the mother of gods, and we have Dagon, and it's really, really wild, occulted stuff.
Yeah, and he's definitely a Satan parody as well.
Yeah, it's a satanic parody, right? That Luciferian kind of other. So this is kind of a pagan inversion of the loss of the child, right? This is the mother of gods, and that's the child Attis, It's kind of wild.
And some people have noted that the looks on their face, it's a knowing grief.
Right.
Meaning,
they knew this was going to happen.
Yeah, that's part of the grief. It's not a shocked grief. It's a knowing grief. And the child is also lit up in light and in red and white. Right. And like I said, the dog, though, I'd like to point out, adds an Artemisian element.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be part of our sub theme for this episode is Artemis.
Yeah, Diana.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that Hecatic kind of stuff, right? It is deeply a sign of the feminine. Anytime you see the dogs or the cats or the snakes, you're invoking the goddess. But it's a wild painting, and this is also right. This is done by Gustave Doré, who's mostly known for woodcuts, not for paintings, right? And they're most famous for doing really expensive editions of the classics. So most famous, they did a bunch of paintings or a bunch of woodcuts, for Dante's Inferno. And they've done some of the most iconic images of Lucifer. Like, I actually have a book here called Cosmogonic Eros, where they have taken one of Dior's woodcuts from Dante and repurposed it as a cover of the book. So,
well, go to the next image. This is also Gustave, doing Poe,
Right.
the Raven.
Connecting us, right? And yeah, Poe, right? We know when we're talking about Poe, we're talking about one of the most magical artists and one of the most revolutionary artists of his time. Everyone was kind of like flabbergasted and shocked when Poe hit the scene, right? He invented the mystery as we know it.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
what's interesting, oh, go for it.
Oh, it's
I was
just
just saying this
I've
beautiful.
always that Lewis Carroll. You know what's the difference between a raven and a riding desk? The answer is Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh.
It's Lewis Carroll being jealous of Edgar Allan Poe. I don't know why anybody can't see that, but it's absolutely what it's about. You know, the answer is Poe. He's the raven at the writing desk. You know.
Right.
And what's wild is I don't think Poe enjoyed his louds or successes. Um, as we're talking,
Mm,
though people were inspired by him, and like how this was a painting done based off the Raven, somebody
mm,
else was inspired by the Raven as well, and it goes back to last week's episode, Rossetti. We were talking
Mm,
about the pre-Raphaelite sisterhood and brotherhood. Dante Rossetti also did some images. If you go to the next image, I think we have one. Yeah, there it is.
yeah,
That's
the Raven.
Rossetti's take on the Raven, and he didn't publish them. They were found in a private collection
So
because he
he
was
just did
really
this
into
for
Poe,
himself. Right.
mm,
Wow.
and so much so that he went on to do what they consider his masterpiece. If you go to the next image, which is the Damoiselle,
Right.
and in this one, give me 1 second here. What's it? I'll give you the date it comes out.
Yeah, the Damsel poem is just incredible too. That's the other thing you got to talk about with this piece is that it's not just a painting, it's also a poem that is a reaction to Edgar Allan Poe, right? Um, the Blessed Damozel, right, is it's inspired by the Raven, in the sense that it's a lover grieving over the death of someone, but it's also what's so wild about the poem is it's an inversion of the Persephone story.
mm,
Yeah,
So, right, in the Persephone story where she's abducted by Hades, now it's she wants to come down to earth to be with Hades. And in my mind, when you showed me this and I went and read the poem, it
mm,
immediately took me into the Indian tradition because we see that same that same magical image through the goddess Sati in Shiva, where Sati she leaves her wealthy kingdom to go be with Shiva and the Ganas, the goblin spirits, in the jungles, right?
mm,
And then her family wants to prevent her from doing this, and then she commits sati and has to come back as a second incarnation, and she comes back as Parvati. And then she goes and does it again. And this time the family's like, okay, we'll let her go be with the jungle man, and we'll just have to deal with our crazy
mm,
son-in-law and
mm.
his goblin friends.
Yeah. Yeah, the pre-Raphaelite stuff was very much about the language of flowers as well. That's why they
Right,
spent so much time, and the lilies for grief and the roses are for love. But
right,
it's also a little bit about Stockholm syndrome, that
right.
the person who is abducted in the end becomes enamored of the person that has power over them.
Well,
So,
this is
but
a
then,
sacred image. I've talked
yeah,
about this a lot because we see this repeated in the feminine myths so often.
yeah,
It is a bit of a Stockholm syndrome, but there's also a reality to this. There's a power to this because
yes,
there's just so many iterations of it, right? Like the classical one we know most famously is the Brothers Grimm Beauty and the
yeah,
Beast. But we also see this through the symbol of the unicorn in general. The unicorn is the beast that has been transformed by the divine mother into the protector. And
yeah,
that's what that represents. And this is the power. The one who's abducted can transform her abductor into her savior through
yeah.
the power of love. And this is
Oh,
a real thing that women had to do, right?
but it's the goth culture and the B&D culture are very close together,
Right.
and and that thing where they lead from the bottom. The bottom ends up being the top. You know, the person who is the submissive ends up actually, you know, being the
You know what that's called? We call that control from below.
Yes, that's correct. And literally in this picture, you know, so where he was the dominant to start off with, he's now beneath her, you know, and
Right.
it's a way for them to discuss it in a society that didn't discuss such things, you know.
Absolutely.
It was discussed in Greek culture. Greek culture got it very much,
Yeah.
you know.
They talk about it a lot. They even talked about other iterations, like the feminine, that if you can't change the masculine, have kids with the masculine and then raise your kids to reject that masculine and transform him, or transform his world, that you are it, you know. This was something that happened. We see that in Lemnos, where the Greek women, you know, they have babies and then throw over the Lemnians and kill them all and create their own women-run world on the island of Lemnos.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's there's a transformative quality that is captured in Greek culture that isn't allowed later in Victorian society. In Victorian society, you had to stay in your wheelhouse. Your wheelhouse was very much prescribed by church and king and country. But, you know, if you follow anything in a Greek myth, it is an arc. You know, we get our story arc from the transformative. You know, when they're young, they sleep with men, but then they get to a certain age where they have sons and daughters, and then their sons and daughters go on their own story arc of what their sexuality is, what their place is in society. And they go through the story arc not only of sexual transformation, but also running the gamut of seeing, you know, what is good in society and what is not. You know, if it doesn't destroy you, you will come out the other side a more balanced, better person for having experienced these extremes. And there was an encouraging, you know, of experiencing everything that life had to offer that certainly wasn't allowed in Victorian society.
No, certainly not. Right? That Christian world is all about the rejection of sin, you know, and it becomes this also this hyper sort of Puritanism, right? Where you're you know, where Puritanism becomes this badge of honor and a display. And you know, and that badge of honor and display is almost also so much a part of the reaction, right? If you're going to put on fake airs, this hypocrisy of purity, then we're going to have to subvert it and mock it, you know, right?
And so they make these beautiful, beautiful works of art that are mocking it in plain sight.
Yeah, exactly.
And people adore it. And, you know, there is a reaction. There is a reaction to pre-Raphaelite art and culture, you know, but I mean, it itself is also a reaction to previous art where they stayed in a wheel. Yeah.
Sorry, what's so wild about this piece is that, like, this particular piece, like, was done up as one of these, like, you know, there's a whole thing when you go into like elaborate Anglican or Catholic churches where you have those boxes where they'll hold the scroll that the Bible's on, and this was built as one of those. It's like a huge elaborate gold piece. When you let me see if I can find it.
Well, so you know, the frame that holds it contains the poem on the frame.
Right.
Yeah. Rossetti etched the poem onto a special frame for the painting later on.
Yeah. And it's based off of these Catholic displays, that these icons that they're doing. So but he's using pagan imagery, you know, he's subverting that, right? It's wild.
Yeah, and you know, all the, like, if you go into a church and you look up at this, like the Sistine Chapel, and you've got all the angels and everything looking down on you, and they're graded. They're graded to the Virgin with the stars around her head and all that sort of stuff. It is so.
Here we go.
So they're using a familiar style, but with pagan culture. So to put in a church, so cool.
It's so cool, right? And like wild. And we can see, he's saying it's all written up all around the frame. The frame is all in gold here.
And he talks about her having 7 stars in her hair and 3 lilies in her hand.
Right.
This is alchemical formula, as well as being astrological.
And an inversion of the Virgin in Revelation. Yeah.
Wow. It's just, you can see here, it's all written there, the Blessed Damozel. And here's the poem here. The blessed damozel leaned out from the gold bar of heaven. Her eyes were deeper than the depth of waters stilled at even. She had 3 lilies in her hand, and the stars in her hair were 7. Her robe, ungirt, from clasp to hem, no wrought flowers did adorn, but a white rose of Mary's gift. For service meetly worn, her hair that lay along her back was yellow like ripe corn. Her seemed she scarce had been a day one of God's choristers. The wonder was not yet quite gone from that still look of hers, albeit to them she left her day had counted as 10 years. To one it is 10 years of years, yet now and in this place, surely she leaned o'er me. Her hair fell all about my face. Nothing, the autumn fall of leaves, the whole year sets a pace. Beautiful stuff, right?
Formulaic, that's a formula right there. Alchemical, where those could be symbolic references for herbs as well as they could be. Yeah, 100%.
There's so much Greek magic here. He's invoking the triple goddess. He's invoking Demeter, the Kori, Persephone, and Diana, as well as Hecate, right? Who's the ungirded one? You know, this is that Greek mystery in full display, right?
Yeah.
Really,
and
really
also
beautiful.
Revealing that the revelation, you know, where there's the virgin who is in the heavens. You know, I see a virgin in the heavens and she is adorned with the stars, and showing that book of Revelation is very different to the rest of the Bible. It is very alchemical. Its language is very symbolic, you know.
Right. Exactly. And those 7 stars, we're talking about the Pleiades. We're talking about this whole thing, right? We're connecting really to that. It's just so wild to me that people don't recognize that the Virgin Mary is the mother of gods, is Magna Mater. It's like Magna Mater was right there in Rome. The Sibyllian cult is right there in Rome. Emperor Justin, or Emperor Julian, the apostate, right? He is the head of this cult, right? And he's trying to fight against the Christians. And what happens? The Christians just take his cult. They just take it and they just leave it. You know,
Julian was so cool because he actually didn't fight, you know, and I think he knew that if you push too hard, they're going to push back. So what he did is he just wrote all this stuff, just
trying to fight them and trying to reveal the pagan side, the real mystery, you know.
You're just making them look like fools, you know. Hey, you know, really, you do this, but you know, this isn't really very moral, is it? You know? And his writings are so sarcastic. They're not. And he didn't ban them or anything. He was just like, okay, you got a point, prove it. And they couldn't, because he was very well educated as well.
Those ratings are great.
Yeah.
You know, my favorite of his, I did a whole deep dive on it, the hymn to the Mother of Gods. Also the hymn to King Helios is really good as well. But the hymn to the Mother of Gods, it tells you just the whole story of Gallus, the whole story of rising to the heights of the ideal, going through the divine imitation, becoming Cybele, the magic of the sacred death, right? The symbolic castration. And he even shows you that, you see, it's a dualistic. This is the thing that the Christians fail, is that the image of Persephone and the image of Attis are one and the same. It's just one is coming down to earth, one is going up to the stars. One is masculine, one is feminine, but it's the same exact story. You have this one who goes through and passes through a death, a transformation that leads them into a becoming, you know? And in Attis's case, right, the death, the symbolic death is the castration and the becoming and the going through that process of imitation. For Persephone, it's the abduction. But if we think about the masculine and the feminine, what is the most, at least, you know, in these kind of cultural stereotypes of the West, what would be your symbolic death? There's nothing worse in that ideal than rape. There's nothing worse than castration. You know, these things aren't that, but that's what those images are, you know? And the Christians just twist it. Instead of it being a castration and a transformation, like they're trying to show you it's this gender transformation. They're trying to show you it's a cycle. That which is above is the same as that which is below. And we're going through this pattern here. But what do the Christians do? They come and they reject the feminine. They make it only the masculine. And instead of it being a gender swap, a castration, now it's just an empowerment and it's a
Mhm.
death.
Mhm.
It's a literal death,
Mhm.
right? Jesus dies, and he dies because he's sinful, right? And so they kind of twist and manipulate the entire mystery.
Yeah. Yeah, and Diana and her shepherd lover, I can't think of his name just offhand at the moment. But yeah, because she's neglecting her duties in the night sky to sleep with him,
Right.
they make him fall into an eternal slumber. And they give her the choice. Either he dies or he sleeps forever. And she went, well, don't kill him. Just let him sleep forever. But even after he sleeps, she's still by him. He fathers 52 children on her. So,
Right.
yeah, so there is this symbolic death again, death, but not death. Yeah.
Yeah, it keeps
Death.
happening.
Yeah.
It happens so often in the Greek stories,
Mhm.
right? There's also all of those magical transformations, right? Like one character that I've been really following and really interested in lately is Hippolytus, right? Because
Oh, yes.
Hippolytus, right, the son of Theseus and the son of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. And what ends up happening to him is his stepmother tries to seduce him. He
Yeah.
stays true and pure, but then she lies about him, commits suicide. And Hippolytus then gets tormented by the gods and gets ripped apart by bulls. But in the
Mhm.
Roman version of this story, Hippolytus doesn't die. Instead of being ripped apart, he's transported in the same way Iphigenia is transported, in the same way that like other character, Medea gets transported, but the gods come and they save him. And he gets taken to Marcy, to Aricia, to the sacred grove of Diana Nemorensis. And they
Mhm.
change his name to Verbius, and he becomes the first slave freed king of that grove. And I'm sure you know these stories because they were so big within Wicca and whatnot.
Mm.
But that idea of the slave priest who then, if another free man comes and kills you, you get to be the next priest of Diana. But that
Yeah.
whole thing comes out of the story of Hippolytus, which I
Mm.
never knew before, which is so wild,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
Oh,
there's
And
all
then
of this transportation stuff anyway.
yeah. But it's a journey too. Like I was only thinking the other day, so many of these Greek stories of these characters that go through these huge transformations, they all begin with young people. I mean, how
Right.
old was Medea when she decided to transport herself? And she was young, right? And
Well,
these
she's
decisions.
abducted, they say, at 13, right? She gets abducted by
Yeah,
Jason at 13. So she couldn't have been more than like 16 when she
yeah.
finally gets free, when you think about it. Like,
Yeah, and like this is a huge arc. It's a huge learning, that these young people are going through that make them a mature character later that we can
right,
relate to. They've got to be a full human. They've got to experience all of these emotions. If you only experience one emotion, if you're only good all the time and happy, and you're not a full human being. We know those people as naive. They don't know
right,
what life is about. And all this art is bringing that. It was trying to take away the naivety from a popular culture. Hey, look
right,
at the whole of human experience. You cannot isolate this from the whole of human experience. Because
right.
you got to get out and live, guys. Get out and live a bit more.
oh,
With all
Well,
its
and this is
pain
so
and
true.
joy.
And
Yeah.
in so much of the Greek mysteries, like we see this time and time again, I immediately think of the story of Apuleius, right? The golden
Mm.
ass. He doesn't get to just join the cult of the Great Mother. He has to go on a whole nightmare metamorphosis, right, of self-discovery. And it's not until he comes to this empowered revelation at the end that she lifts the veil, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about waiting for the right moment,
Yeah.
You got to be at the right place at the right time, and it will happen when you're ready,
Yeah. And then Shakespeare retells it in A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's just lovely.
Right.
It's like,
Wild stuff.
yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going here, Dion. What do we got next?
well,
Wow.
actually, this book kind of encapsulates some of the themes that you guys were just discussing. Young, we're talking about the female journey through these times, through a patriarchal society, talking about gender bending, talking about redemption, talking about convents. It's a lot of this is encapsulated in one of these books right here. we've talked about penny dreadfuls before, like which people talk about dime store comics or this is the form of a book that these are called Gothic blue books. Came out around the 1800s, and these are your little penny dreadfuls, little stories that you could read that are Gothic stories. The one, the Black Convent, is a good one. There's a few of them. Now, the Black Convent, it's a story about a young woman who has to dress up as a monk, a male monk, and enter into a convent to try to rescue her father. And while she's in there, she's people try to accost her because they find out she's a female. There was people trying to accost her before that because they thought she was a young male. But eventually the head bishop finds out that she's there to find her father, and she ends up marrying one of the monks she falls in love with, and it's a happy ending. And everyone, it's funny. This one is a happy ending, even though it's called the Black Convent. But go to the next one, which is the interesting one, and this is a Father Innocent, the Capuchins, and this one is darker. With this one, Father Innocent goes to a witch named Sabrina and asks for a magical spells and for her to invocate Lucifer because he needs help to dream rape a young village girl named Ambrosia.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the 1800s. And this is something you could read, and they're set in convents. There's sexual themes, vampiric themes. It's as Gothic as it gets. Father Innocent.
That that kind of dream magic, this connects us to the grimoire tradition, because if you read any of these grimoires, they are disgusting. They are filthy. They're, I mean, there are some interesting stuff there, but there's a lot of this kind of, if you do this spell, this woman will be your slave. If you do this spell, you can enter her dreams and you can have your way with her. Here's a spell to literally ride atop a succubus and enter into the mind of a young woman and possess her.
If you could hit the next picture, but why she's talking.
There's several spells in the Greek magical papyrus to do that, so I can see why they. We've got to go and approach a witch that knows how to do this, so I can do it.
But like my point, like this author, or maybe even within the popular culture at this time, people may have had a general awareness of some of this, of that black magic, of what that was.
It must have. Right? They must have, for it to be, relatable. Yeah.
So this is okay. So I added a couple pictures here, Dion.
So this was printed just a few years earlier than those Gothic blue books. They would have had the compendium.
Yeah.
To draw from.
This is a very, there wasn't, this wasn't well known and whatnot, but this is from the 1775. It's the compendium. What is it called? It has a wild
a demonology and magic.
Yeah, that's its common name. But it's also called the like Bite Me Not, or because famously on the cover it says that like I won't bite, or Noli Me Tangero. Compendium. It's the Compendium Raricium Totius Artis Magicae. It goes on and on. One of these wild Latin names, but a really, really wild book. And what's so wild about it is that it had 30 high quality illustrations in this book, and these illustrations get wild. And I chose a couple here because I wanted to like we looked at earlier. We had that book Arethusa by Schiaparelli, and she's doing sigil magic in that book and using sigils. And this is where that sigil stuff is coming from. And also, I wanted to show, we have that wild feminine here with the Medusa.
But it's also the way that they're written. Like, they're not traditional sigils. Like the character Asterots. Like her symbol is a star. It is a 5-pointed star. We've got the 8-pointed star there. So it actually looks more like the original, what they said was the angelic language, all finished with those little circles at the end of every
like
Right.
Enochian. And
Well, yeah, sort of, but it was like
We were
even
looking into when we
pre-Enochian,
were
yeah.
looking a couple maybe a year and a half back. Dion and I did like a 4-part series where we were searching for dragon tongue, because there's this transition that happens where the you know, like the Babel speech of the Greek magical papyri, right, the grammatita, all and or you know this transitions into, it melds in with astrological symbols and with Christian symbols, and it develops its own kind of character, and it starts to become like this, you know, and things like these crosses and the little balls are like very, very quintessentially of this kind of period in the Middle Ages, right?
Yes.
Which is interesting. This is a book from 1775, but it claims on the front cover to be from the 10th century, from 1040 AD, you know, and it's really trying to harken back to an earlier tradition, you know.
Yeah, I forget the name of the author, but he was. I'll put it in the notes later. I'll go and find it. But he writes a lot about this angelic language, and
Interesting stuff.
it's pre-Enochian. It's pre-Enochian, but he's very much about all of the demons and the angels, but he focuses more on the angels, and there's a lot of magic in the book, even though he's a church father, but he does write about this language.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but it's all symbols with the little circle terminus at the end of the line.
Right. And then, of course, go ahead,
if
sir.
I can say one thing about those symbols, they can be interpreted multiple ways as letters phonetically. You could visually interpret them, but they also could be used as geometry, as like the golden triangle, or to put shapes, sacred geometry. But they also could be used as astrology, as points on a compass, and as well as their alchemical symbols. So some people could see that sigil and go, "Oh, that's Mercury. Oh, you add it to some gold and you put it in the fire." And so the sigils work a lot of different ways. It's just depending on which school of interpretation you come from. And sometimes they're stacked. There's multiple meanings on them as well.
Yep.
Right. This is why it gets so wild, because when we were doing with the Dragon Time, we were finding musical notation, we were finding astrological notation, we were finding like the grammatita, which is the Babel stuff from the Pelasgian tradition, and it's all mashed in then on top of these sigils that they're constructing themselves. So it's like some of this is really ancient. We're talking going back as far as we can in the European tradition, and some of it is contemporary to the book itself. It's kind of a wild thing, right?
Well, also mind you, there's nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
In that those are the hand signs and hand signals, body gestures, are the type of clothes we wear, the type of the color we wear, how we stand and how we do our hair is the nonverbal communication that sets us apart or identifies people. In this image, this is another one of those images from the book that are wild, that are alchemical spells.
I wanted to talk about this particular image because this image would have resonated to anyone with a background in Roman literature, because this immediately looks like Erectho, the classical witch from Lucan's Pharsalia and Ovid and a bunch of these famous myths. But this is a very classical image of a myth of a witch from the Greco-Roman tradition, at least like the parodied versions you see in the later Roman tradition, like Erectho is a Thessalian witch. She's said to have snakes in her hair, to have wild gray hair that almost looks like a cloud. You know, she's always running around in ragged cloth. She's always followed by dogs. And she usually has her mouth agape with razor sharp teeth. And she's usually drinking blood and stuff, right? So this is like a very classic kind of image. I mean, we do get the more modern demon here, but this kind of a woman of the woods with the snakes in the hair, that's so Roman. That's so Greek, you know?
Also voodoo, you know, the reason why people forget, the reason for dreadlocks is to keep the demons out of your hair from doing that. Like they believe that the demons can lodge in your hair and you carry them around in your hair. So, yeah. So, you know, so much has come down to us through all of these cultures.
Right. And this was another image I wanted to show because we get an actual female witch ungirded in the Hecatean magical tradition with, a tripod and a brazier, right? Like, so this, we're dealing with some real iconic imagery here, right? The ungirded thing takes us back again into the ancient Greek, and the tripod is the ancient Greek. The thyrsus that she's holding is the ancient Greek. But then we have a more modern magical wand, and we have a more modern magical sash. Really interesting, you know?
And
You
they
know,
had to,
as,
had to
And
study
the
for
red rope.
generations. Sorry, go ahead, Dion. I'm interrupting.
oh no, go for it.
I was just going to say, and the traditional Greek Hecatean tradition was so well respected. Like they were like, you studied for 5 years to get 1 degree, then 10 years to get the next degree. And some of them, if they lived to 75, the older you were, you kept studying. And the older the witch was, the more respected she was for being able to invoke Hecate clearly.
Yeah.
So
And like
was,
this kind of Hecatic Thessalonian witch tradition, it's like it's both beloved and terror and feared within the Greek tradition, right? We have to like within the Greek world, these people were allowed to practice this openly, and this is what they're doing. They're tits out, torches high, and they're doing poison magic. A lot of like when we look at the classical witches from Thessaly, they were doing a lot of what we would call aphrodisiacs and helping with midwifery, also doing classical honors, but they were a huge and poison, but they were a huge part of the Greek society. And these women would travel all around Greece, and they were well known for this look and for this thing. And it becomes this fearful thing that by the time you get to the Roman age, right, they're not connected to Thessaly. They're not seeing these Thessalonian witches. And yet we have this character of Erectho in Lucan's Pharsalia and in Ovid. We have the Thessalonian witches in Apuleius's The Golden Ass. They become the central figure of fear within the Roman culture. It's interesting.
Yeah. It's a bit like the Kadaicha in Australia. They're actually feared, but they're the justice bringers. So they were like, if something's out of whack. But I mean, I love that picture, not only because it reminds me of a friend who does ritual like that. Hello, Edinburgh.
Right.
but like that story where Hecate knows where Persephone is, and to stop Demeter from being mourning, she jumps up on a table and essentially does a table dance. Right. And it's so hilarious. It makes Demeter laugh. And she gets her breasts out. And wiggles her breasts in front of Demeter.
Well,
and
you're talking about you're talking about Hecate as bubo. It's not just her breasts. She exposes her whole vulva. She exposes her
wiggles
whole
the vulva and everything.
Yeah.
So
it makes her laugh, and that stops the grief, and the spring returns, and then the Kori shows back up.
and that's in Japanese tradition as well. You have the Yuzumi. Yuzumi is like so respected over there. And men pay thousands of dollars to go in with a Yuzumi performer who enacts this, bringing the sun out from behind the clouds when she was hiding by doing this erotic, hilarious dance. It's a huge thing in Japanese culture, the Yuzumis.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But we see this kind of thing, right? Like, and this is also, the grief is an interesting thing within the Greek tradition, because when we're talking about, Demeter is the most powerful witch of all time. She raises the dead. And she does it through the magic of grief, through crying, right? She's that power of nature. And this image is supposed to show you, right? You understand this as a witch, but if you're going to do that true magic where you're drawn down the moon, you have to enter into that wild abandon. You have to engage that madness, that grief. It has to be that level, right? And this is where these women are going. That's what they're doing. But once you gain that level, how do you come back down to earth? How do you come back into reality? And this was the issue for Demeter, in the myths, she's traveling all around the world, crying her eyes out, until finally Greek hospitality, they welcome her in, they give her some wine, they give her some food. She doesn't want to eat it. And then got a flasher, wake her up. But it worked.
Right? It's like, and that's, after a ritual, you must ground with food and drink, and
right.
Alcohol will take you out of, and a lot of people don't realize alcohol does take you out of that ritual state. So it
Oh,
it
yeah.
does bring you down, you know. It's a good way to
Absolutely.
cut it off.
Wild
Yeah.
stuff, eh?
Yeah.
So I wanted to show this one because I thought this guy was pretty goth looking. And this connects to Dion. We were talking about this in previous episodes. I'm not sure if you're going to bring this up, but John Dee and like Giordano Bruno, these magicians with the black caps and the black capes that are they're kind of taking it from the Capuchin monks, but it's also kind of a throwback to the ancient pagan traditions. But this whole black necromancy robe thing is a big deal at this time.
Yeah. He looks very much like a Russian Orthodox priest, especially with those type of crosses as well.
Right.
And do you think that's a misspelling of Carpathiomantia? Carpathia, because it could be from the Carpathian Mountains.
I'm not sure. Let's see if this even says it. How do I spell that? Tromantia.
Catriomantia.
Tromantia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cataptromantia. I'm not getting anything.
No. Yeah, but you know, there's that Hungarian magic tradition. I know we're going to go there. I'm half Hungarian, so I'm very
Right.
much into that.
Okay. This is what it says. It says cataptromancy. I found it. It's just a misspelling, and it's an ancient Greek practice of mirror divination. Divination. So that is actually a mirror, and that's probably a picture of himself out of magical garb.
Well, there
right?
you go.
Oh wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
I didn't
And
even
we
know
know
that
like
was
the
a word.
mirror stuff is such
Powerful.
Aphrodisic magic, right? It's huge.
Yeah, and very transformative. You know, if anybody stands with a candle in front of a mirror, you're going to see things, and your face will change.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so have a go at
Absolutely.
home if you're listening. Yeah, it's good.
No,
It's really
actually, that was one of the first magic spells I ever played around with as a kid. I remember I read a book and they're like, light a candle, look in the mirror, and you know, if you meditate long enough and let your mind wander, you'll see past lives, you'll see the spirits, and yeah, you will.
Yeah, so maybe that's what he's doing there. So yeah,
Right?
because the image
Beautiful.
changes. So yeah, have a go. It's actually very safe.
And
Yeah.
I had to include this. Right? The monstrous feminine, ungirded with the snake in the kolpos. Anyone who's into that Greek magic will see this is like, this image here really reminds me of the Aeneid when we're talking about the Furies, Alecto, when she's running wild through the streets of Rome. Yeah, this is the spirits of fury, right? The Manes, the children of Hecate, right? The spirits of the dead. Really wild stuff, you know.
And if you could note is she holding a head? Is that the head? Yeah. So note that for
head.
Yep, for later in this episode.
Right.
That
and we
comes
also
into play.
You know, we've talked about this a lot. Like when we were looking into the dragon tongue, okay, there's this whole thing about those who have the dragon tongue have the snakes around them. Specifically, you have the snake in the kolpos, right, which is in the folds, which talking about, again, the vulva. You got to have the snake in the vulva in order to be able to wield the dragon tongue. It's just a thing. And it also relates to the mark. It relates to the tattooing. So I'm not sure exactly how this all comes together because a lot of that tradition has been lost, but there's some serious wild stuff going on here with the snake and the vulva and the mark of these witches, right? The sign of their power and the invocation of Hecate.
I was going to have my snake here with me on screen today, and after looking at that image, I'm so glad I didn't.
Oh gosh,
I don't know why you do that, because like I know what I feed her, and you wouldn't want to put it out there.
Oh God.
Yeah, right? No, it's not nice. But yeah, now my beautiful snake, she's like 10 foot now. She's albino Darwin python, so she's beautiful yellow and white.
Oh, that's amazing. What's her name?
So might bring her on one day, as long as we're not going to relate it to images like that.
I wasn't even sure. I'm like, should I show this image? Yeah, I got to show this image. It's too wild.
Yeah, yeah, it's an amazing image. It is, and you can certainly see everything from Kali all the way through.
Right, Medusa, Kali, Erectho, Medea, the Furies. All of that imagery is there, right? But I mean, the heart encircled by a serpent, right? This is PGM. The serpent in the kolpos. This is the PGM. This is also that deep Median magic. We're getting into some real occulted wildness here, right? I think this is this is the last one from the Compendium on Demonology. But I wanted to show this because we got an actual necromantic rite. We have a dude in a magic circle with a torch and a sword, right? Weapons of the magus, and they're gonna use the hangman's body to call the dead. And they have a broom. They're standing across atop a broom.
Skull and crossbones in the corner. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got all of the classic witch imagery here, you know, and necromantic imagery, just wild stuff.
So they're cutting his hair for a spell for later, I'd say. So
yeah, the dead man's hair, and they're getting the grave dirt, right? You know, especially the dirt where someone had died by hanging or by like crucifixion, right? This is the most magical dirt in the Christian tradition. They get all obsessed with this kind of stuff. They want the dirt that is mixed with the blood and the feces of the dead.
Yeah, yeah.
Real
well, it's the
wild.
gladiator tradition as well. They used to run
right
to get that as well. But it's a hoodoo thing. Like, and I have a little box with like selected dirt from different graves, because you leave them an exchange. You give them a nice shiny silver coin in exchange for that. And there is you can ask, like, you've paid for a little bit of their dirt, so you can ask them a favor. There is it's still a tradition that's used today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Powerful magic here. All right. So Dion, what are we talking about here?
Well, another gentleman that's Gothic in nature, let's say, because he was supposedly possessed by the devil. This is 1770. Giuseppe Tartini, a violinist. We were talking about Paganini last time, how he plays violin and throw people into a trance. Well, in 1770, this violinist was he invented something called the Devil's Trill.
Yeah, Devil's Trill was a wild sonata, and at the time, right, this is like a solo violin piece, and it was like, you know, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to perform, depending on how fast you're playing it. And it was one of it, you know, you brought up Paganini, and Paganini kind of takes a lot from Tartini, right? Because a lot of this was showboating. You know, you purposely perform this piece in the most painful and ridiculous. We see this on YouTube. Tartini would have been one of those guys who's purposely playing the most complicated, most insane music possible for attention and views. You know, that's what he's doing. He's making it near impossible. So anyone who plays the violin, they look at him and they go, how are you physically able to do this? This should not work. Right?
You thought they're possessed. They would say, and he built upon that. He's let's call it the Devil's Trill then. And he like Paganini used the hype. This is our Marilyn Mansons. This is our Gothic people or rock star musicians invoking. Go for it.
Yeah, he was the Elvis of his day. Like, the Devil's Trill was supposed to give, like, they didn't say orgasm, but it was supposed to take women to the point of ecstasy. So women would go with this big expectation with their friends, and sit there like, we're ready, we're waiting for it. Is it going to happen? And these women would scream and faint during the Devil's Trill, and it was supposed to be because, you know, the devil was there and they're getting a bit hot under the collar. So but it was like the first time that women were having that, you know, screaming star reaction.
Yes, the Beatles, Elvis.
It was the hype around the musician, like, you know, whether or not they were actually going to have an orgasm, they were expecting it. So they went in there, you know, with their heightened expectations, and
Right. And this goes back again to that ancient Greek magical tradition, because of course, who is the devil? The devil is Lucifer, Apollo, right? The twin of Aphrodite, or the twin of Diana, but the mirror of Aphrodite. But this wild stuff, right? We see this within the classical stories too, right? Apollo, he challenges the great musicians to best him or to match him, right? And if you can match him, he will reward you and he will give you that magic. And we can see how this transitions. You go 200-300 years in the future, we get to Robert Johnson at the crossroads. Where do you meet the devil? Where do you meet Hecate? At the crossroads, right?
Yeah.
You're selling your soul. Any artist sells their soul. Anyone who sells their work understand, like, it's not about the selling of the soul, it's about the besting of the devil. This is the thing that I think that the Christian tradition and our modern tradition has twisted, right? Robert Johnson bested the devil, and that's why he got famous. The devil gives fame, but in order to get fame, you have to prove your mastery, right?
Yeah,
it's wild
Well,
stuff.
you know what I also like to address is, we were talking about how women would go to the theater with expectations. During that same time period, they were doing Storm and Stress. What is it? Sturm and
There's
Drang.
Sturm und Drang, right? Which is that pre-romantic kind of stuff.
And they would dress up as their favorite character and go there and commit suicide because the character commits suicide. And they would go watch the performance and dress up like them and go home and commit suicide. Like, Rocky Horror was fun when we were a kid.
Taking cosplay a little bit too far when you do that.
Yeah. Wild times during that time period. Hit the next pick.
Oh, so we're getting into the Hellfireclub. So I added a couple of more pictures here. So this is actually a pamphlet that was released just before King George condemned the Hellfireclub, and there was a bunch of these. So this is about the first Hellfireclub. So Shay will have to inform us on some of this because she went and actually visited. But the first Hellfireclub was started by this guy, Duke Wharton. And it was in the 1720s, and it was largely based upon Rabelais' Abbey of Theleme, which came from Gargantua and Pantagruel. And it was a libertine, rakish society. So it was about doing ridiculous parodies of Christian masses. It was about getting together and getting sloshed, reciting erotic poetry, and having orgies. And that's really what it was about. And Duke Wharton was really this kind of radical libertine figure. But this first society was not the magical Hellfireclub that we come to know, even though it inspires stuff. It's also kind of really deeply debaucherous, because connected to this also, here's Duke Wharton. But this guy, Francois Chateret, he was known as the rape master general. These guys were disgusting and wild. He had claimed to have raped over 10,000 women. Only one ever came against him, because his whole thing was he would invite these poor peasant women to his large estate, and then he would corner them, rape them, and if they said anything, he would have them beaten and thrown out, and they'd lose their job. Until eventually one of these women stood up and actually went to the police, and he gets charged. And this is part of the reason why the original Hellfireclub falls apart, because it comes out he's a part of this rakish society that they're promoting the rape of women. Eventually, he gets pardoned, but he did serve, they say, 8 months in prison. And while he was in prison for 8 months, they think he contracted something and he dies shortly after. And even the woman he raped came to recant her stuff. She was pressured, and she recanted. These men were, what I wanted to show is, like, these men were near untouchable, and they had this extreme power and decadence. And it's just, but also on one hand, where we have people like this guy going around raping people, the Hellfireclub, the first version, was also the first club in all of England to welcome women. Even before taverns allowed women to enter, women could be a part of the Hellfireclub. Now, cynical me says that's because they need women for their orgies, but they still did it, right?
Yeah, and and that's the problem with these things. We get, like, satanic panic is not a new thing. It's just not a new thing. And the church did invest a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort putting these pamphlets out against them. So they were worried about them.
They were worried.
Yeah, but the like you said, the woman that did accuse him recanted, and we see this happen a lot. Like, they didn't tolerate people who abused women. That was one of their things. One of their central tenets was women are goddesses. And that's why you got women wanting to join, whether they had duchesses, and they said, they implied there was even higher status women than that, all the way through to, Suki, the tavern waitress, who was very famously the White Lady, or the ghost that's still in there today. But
can I ask you a question? Are you talking about the caves? Are you talking about the original like that house place, their mansion or the manor?
We're talking about, this is before the house, before the caves. This is
before,
the first one.
They actually went underground, literally,
yes.
from there.
So,
but these men were, I mean, one of the things that vows that they took was to improve society and honor women. So, the fact that the church came out and went, well, they don't honor women. He's raped 100 women. And let's pay this woman to go and, make some accusations against him.
Well, this guy admitted to raping over 10,000. This guy is the rape master general. So I think it's okay. Duke Wart, it's complicated when we're dealing with these societies, because on one hand, it is this truly beautiful, progressive thing. And on the other hand, it is this decadent, noble thing where they don't even view the poor as people. And we have to acknowledge that. It's, Duke Wharton's an interesting figure, because after his society gets destroyed, his reputation doesn't fall. Everyone still loves him. And he winds up joining the Freemasons and becomes the Grand Master of the Freemasons in his lifetime. So he just shifts his directive into something more publicly acceptable and is welcomed. Whereas that guy dies, So what I'm trying to show is like, it's complicated. There is this element that you're saying, but there is also this ridiculous debauchery and in wildness,
one of the only ways to get excluded from the club was to disrespect women.
Right.
So, so if he had done that, they would have kicked him out.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
what ends up happening is, because of him, the society falls and he dies.
Yeah. Well, they kicked out the Marquis de Sade. The Marquis de Sade was in the later iteration. And they
so you got to tell us about the second version with Sir Francis Dashwood.
Well, Sir Francis Dashwood, they actually passed a law. I can't remember the exact date of the law, but saying that no heresy can take place on British soil. So he went, fine, we'll do it under British soil. But when you go to the caves, there are 4 statues in the main hall, and the one in the place of the greatest honor is Dionysus. So and it's amazing, because you're 30 foot underground, and this statue of Dionysus is covered with living matter, right, with all these vines, and it's still alive. And they've got Aphrodite.
If you could go to the next picture, I have a picture of the cave right there.
Yep, that's what it looks like today. Yeah. So and they've turned it into like a little tourist trap there, and
with the cafe and
they have fright nights there and things like that, and they don't really speak about the history very much. So they were like Benjamin Franklin. I mean, these
claim to have at least gone to their parties.
Oh,
right?
No, he was a chartered member. And when he was in England, he spent a lot of time there. But he, what he accomplished. But he was famous for the fact that when he was in France, he slept with so many French women. And there's a poem in there about the 22. Right? And a lot of people assume that it's about 22 steps, but the poem about 22 is like, have you slept with more than 22 women? Right? You don't really know what love and sex is about until you won't find love. Your true love is beyond these 22 steps. Right? So it's like they're encouraging people to sleep. But it wasn't just the men sleeping with the women. They also encouraged the women to be sexually empowered as well.
Right.
So there is a lot of stuff in there when you start to read about their tenets that sounds very much like the officers who were coming back from India, bringing Tantra and Tantric concepts back with them as well, which is very much about the honoring and the worshipping of women. And they were they used their wealth to fund the suffragette movement. They use their wealth to fund these things in society, to change society. This is why the church hated them so much.
Absolutely.
And the church found that by putting out these pamphlets saying how disgusting and what they were doing, they got chapters opening everywhere in America, in Ireland, in France. There was an inrush to become part of the Hellfire. So the Hellfireclub wasn't just the caves. It wasn't just the first iteration. They had chapters all around the world. And these wealthy men were expected to use, like when the Hellfire Caves were built by Dashwood, it was just at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and there was massive unemployment. So he insisted that he employed only the locals and that they do the work by hand, which resulted in an easy transition from the agrarian lifestyle into the technical lifestyle, because he supported his community. And there was a large, when you read the accounts by the locals of these people, they loved them. They loved these people. They certainly included the locals on the same level as them. There's a gentleman in there who's honored called Paul Whitehead. And Whitehead was just the groundskeeper, but he was an equal member. And when he died, they gave him a procession and 21-gun salute. So it was very much like the Freemasons. It didn't matter what area of society you came from, you could be an equal member.
And we were talking about this, like Dion and I, we did a whole big thing where we were exploring, because like a lot of people forget or people aren't aware that, because of propaganda by the church, but the vast majority of these secret societies from the 1700s, the quintessential and the most archetypical would be the Illuminati. The Bavarian Illuminati is a democratic, humanist, feminist organization that's whole thing. They're not magical at all. Their whole thing was convincing middle-class business people to embrace humanism and Enlightenment values, right? And this, though, is not like, when we started diving into these secret societies, it's like they're either Enlightenment humanists and trying to bring democracy, or they're Jacobite, blood in the soil monarchists of the most wild character, and there's no in between.
No. Yeah, it's quite bizarre. Here is the church relying on suppression for its power, and here is some of these were great minds as well. They weren't just the idiots with money, that inherited it from their family. A lot of these were incredible business people, inventors and scientists and people like that, who wanted to actually embody that age of enlightenment in the world. And really had to struggle against the church in order to bring this enlightenment about, to throw off that yoke of, suppression that's going to keep everybody poor, and in the feudal mentality, giving their money to the church and doing the church appointing who's going to be, the archdeacons.
We also have to just reconcile with the success of the mystery cults and the Enlightenment, and the fact that this is beyond a shadow of a doubt now. If you're looking at the histories of revolution, if you go to the French Revolution, it's the Martinists who are the biggest key push for that revolution. If you go to the USA, it's the Freemasons who are the biggest push for that revolution, right? Our modern democracy, as we understand it, is coming out of these occulted places. It's coming out of these secret societies, and there's we can't deny it. I mean, also some of the more radical stuff, radical monarchism and conservatism is also coming from the same place. We can't deny that. But they weren't successful. They didn't change society. The Freemasons and the Martinists did. And we're living in that world. Now, some people want to push this to the nth degree and say, oh, the world is controlled by no, the world is not controlled by, but they were hugely successful for a time, and we're living in the post-Enlightenment age because of them, right? The Hellfire group is a part of that legacy.
Yeah. And I think we've always got to watch out for those, 4 tenets of propaganda. Of course, they were used against the early church. They're undermining our society. They're drinking blood. They're sacrificing children, and they're not human, and that's how they started to eliminate, the early Christians. And then when Catholicism became the Christian sect that, that was dealing out the power, they went, okay, we'll take these 4 tenets of propaganda and we'll turn it against all of our opposition. We'll call them witches. We'll say they're drinking blood. We'll say they're sacrificing children. They're undermining our society. And they, when we hear this, as soon as you hear those 4 tenets of propaganda, your alarm bells should go off and go, okay, who in power is trying to get rid of this group?
Right.
And this is a lesson from history that our awakened minds should learn, and when be be very suspicious when all people speak well of you, but when all people are speaking the 4 tenets of propaganda, be suspicious as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also need to talk about the Hellfireclub just because of its pop cultural mystique in the fact that it influences, like Crowley famously, he didn't join, but he was deeply inspired by them, and it sent him to Rabelais. And then
Yes.
Rabelais inspired him to call his religion Thelema, the Greek word for will, right?
Mhm.
And then now, in modern times, the group that owns this building and that runs it is a Crowleyan Thelemic organization, right? Which is kind of interesting.
At the one at West Widcombe.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
read online.
Oh, okay. I don't know about that. I thought it was like it's part of the Historical Society. We actually had to we found out after going around England and going to all these magical historical places that you can actually pay a subscription to the Historical Society and you get to go into them all for free. But we were paying like $25 to $50 to go into all these places. And the British Historical Society issued the tickets, not anything from Thelema.
Okay, I just know that there still is a Hellfire Society, and they claim now to be a part of the how a lot of these occult groups, we accept the book of the law and we accept do what thou wilt, and they do that, and you can go and pay and get yourself a little card that says I'm a member of the Hellfireclub, and they sell modern books, but it seems to be more of a fan club rather than anything. This particular group, but Thelema itself certainly has plenty of magical societies and orders that are far more practice oriented.
But there are still chapters of the Hellfireclub, most notably in the United States. A lot of the out of a couple of the universities, they run chapters that can literally trace their lineage all the way back to Dashwood and beyond from this society.
I did read conspiracies, like people think the Skull and Bones Society from Yale is related to them and stuff like this.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's and they don't. I'll put the name of the one that I know about up in the notes later.
Right.
I don't want to get it wrong by just just saying it from memory, but there are legitimate ones, but no, Skull and Bones is a magical tradition, but it's a different magical tradition. It's its own tradition. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the problem with a lot of this stuff, is that we have to sift through the conspiracy and all of the people's weird opinions.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
But history is traceable. Like there's always a paper trail. There is a paper trail, and it's like anybody can get. That's the sad and the good thing about the internet, is anybody can get on and write any theory that they like, but then go back and do your academic, research,
due diligence,
trace, do your due diligence. I said it, spoonerized, but go back and trace the lineages back. You can find the real historical documents, the charters, all those sorts of things. You can trace them back. They're a matter of public record. Yeah,
let's continue here. Okay, now we're getting into some wildness. I recognize this, Dion. This is La Voisin.
You broke her down earlier. She had a cult, she's like a mafia boss in Paris. Part of it was he was doing abortions for royalty, for rich people, because
blackmail
back then, also because you couldn't have an heir to a throne.
Yeah.
So or this and that. So, and there was also a lot of it was called the affair of the poisons, is one of the terms that they gave into it, because a lot of people were being poisoned. as well as abortions. You know, and this was what you would call a back alley abortion. You would ride a carriage from the palace down to the back streets of Paris, and this modern witch would give you a potion, and the next thing you know, you would be clear of
Well,
your indiscretions.
the thing with Lavoisier is, right, she's a mob boss. She would get you in touch with everyone. She was the middleman largely for all of this. So she had all of these connections to the nobility. So say someone has a child out of wedlock or is pregnant and you want to hide it, you would go see Lavoisier, and then she would take you to one of these midwives who could then administer you the proper care. And then she would a lot of this is accusation. And a lot of this, we have to remember with Lavoisier, two really important things. When this case happened, it was such a huge problem, and it was such a horrible, it caused such a huge outcry in the public, and the public were so offended that this was allowed to even happen at all, that the king decided to occult the entire thing. He imprisoned people under a special law where he imprisoned them personally. They didn't get charged in court. So she was executed by word of the king. She was never fully tried. And all of the letters were hidden. And the only thing that we have about Lavoisier was found 25 years later. When
Yeah, under the floorboards.
turned up. Yeah.
Under the floorboards.
Under
Somebody
the
was.
floorboard.
Yeah, no, she was like the very famous middleman because she was doing love spells for both Madame Pompadour and Madame de Montespan, which were Louis' two favorite mistresses. And they were like, well, make him only love me and get rid of her. And so she was doing it for both of them at the same time. And
that's how she gets caught, right? Is because the secret police are following not her, they're following the king's mistresses. And one of them is going to her and asks her to kill the king's other mistress. Yeah. And Lavoisier refuses, but just the asking, now the Secret Service knows about you, and they start investigating, and look what happens.
Yeah, she was arrested. She was arrested for attempting to poison the king. So,
which king? King Louis. King Louis, huh?
But it was a love spell.
She never did actually attempt to it.
No, it was a love spell that she'd given one of the mistresses that was supposed to be put into his cup, but God knows what was in there. You know, it was probably. So she's actually arrested for attempting to poison the king because these two were getting love spells and love potions from her and both, tipping it in his wine. So
anyway, but what they discover though is this whole abortion blackmail racket where she has all of these noble people under her thumb, and that she's making millions, and like she is so rich. This is like people freak out over how much power she had, and she had amassed it in a very short amount of time because, right, abortions are such a problem at this time, and if she's the one who knows that so-and-so was pregnant by so-and-so, now she has all the power over these noble families. And then it gets even more worse when the accusation, and again, we don't have any evidence for this. This is all pure accusation. But the accusation was that she's taken these aborted fetuses and then using them in black magic rites. And one of the priests actually confessed. We do have one confession where he confessed to ripping apart baby bodies and drinking the blood on behalf of these nobles in order to give them immortality and to give them power, you know?
Yeah, she was accused of child sacrifice, but it was abortions that she was using. But
she was doing I mean, it's clear that she was doing the black mass. She was like, people were paying for that. But the question is, how much for Lavoisier, this is all a racket. For the priests that are involved, it's all a racket.
She would pay a model. She would pay a poor girl off the streets to come in and get naked and lay on the altar.
Yeah, this is not real.
Right? It's a little bit like Anton LaVey in the modern day. He's a circus performer. He's putting on a performance. People forget that.
Well, it's the same thing we see, like I said, in Africa where they're killing those albino children, right? The shamans who are killing these albino children and doing these immortality rites, they're just doing it to make money. And the people who are paying for this are creepy, weird, rich people who are out for power. There's always creepy, weird, rich people who are willing to do anything to try and live forever. And Lavoisier is just exploiting that, And I don't think she was actually doing any serious black magic. I think, but she was staging a play for people.
Yes,
and it was fucking terrifying.
yeah. It was performance art at its darkest. You know,
Right,
yeah.
right.
But I think,
And they would write about it. They would write about it at the time and build the mythos until it became like a modern, you know, like nowadays when we have the Zodiac killer or whatever, and we're worried about. People were afraid. It was a satanic panic.
This has got to be a Netflix miniseries. You know, it's like it's got all the elements that would just.
I don't know why no one has done it. Like it would be so. Like the mob boss Lavoisier would be such an amazing character.
Yeah.
The godmother,
the dark, and you know, a little bit of supernatural in the background, and you know, politics and all of it. It's got it all. You know,
it's got it all.
Yeah,
right?
I think we should sit down and like brainstorm it and write it and submit it to Netflix.
There you go. Submit it. Netflix.
Well, you know, the thing is, this is not the first time that there was a group of female poisoners. It's throughout history. If you go to the next image, this is called Aquatrona, and this is Italy in the 1600s before Lavoisier, and what's her name is Geronima Spana. And she was a famous woman who made poisons. She was an astrologer and a poisoner. And she was giving poison to women who wanted to become widows for whatever reason. If maybe your husband beat you, or maybe you wanted to take his money for whatever reason. Until she was tried, and she did astrology and poisons. And it was called Aquatrona, this water, and arsenic based.
Well, you know, makes me think like a while
poison
back,
over a long period of time. So you know,
Dion and I really want to do for our next series after the goth stuff. We want to dive into famous witches and look into like the witch executions. This is something that I've been researching with my wife, and we discovered this. Are you familiar with the first ever person who was burned for witchcraft recorded? Theoris of Thessaly. So this is really interesting. So this is from the ancient Greek world, and she was a Thessalian witch in the Hecatean tradition, and she is killed, and her whole family is killed. And all we have is a couple of speeches by Demosthenes and like people writing about that speech, and that's the only evidence we have of this. But it's the earliest documented witch burning. But it wasn't like what we would think of as a witch burning, because they're not persecuting her for doing magic. They're persecuting her for poisoning people. The accusation is that she gave people the wrong medicine and they died. And then she gets killed for it. But
that's the mistranslation of Exodus, where it says you will not tolerate a witch amongst you in the King James. It's actually Mahashephet, which is don't tolerate a poisoner amongst you.
Right. But there's always this connection, right? Even when we go back to the ancient Greek, these witches were dealing in poisons, right? Now, they were using this kind of magic to help and heal. But when you're dealing with poisons, you run the risk, right? You know, and later on it becomes more wild, right? You get those the serious poisoners and stuff. But really interesting.
Yeah, I'm in my book, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Witch? I've gone the other way. I've looked at the last witch trials and the last witch burnings. And did you know that the last state organized witch hunts, the ones that the government approved of, was here in Australia in the 1970s?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I've actually been taken to court for witchcraft. So I know you think Australia's so progressive, but but no, I lost. I was accused of witchcraft publicly in court, and I had to use the Apuleius defense in court to try, like, going, if she's really afraid of me, why would she have me here in court? You know, so.
But that's so ridiculous.
Yeah, but she was ordered what do you call it, a protection order against me. And it was laughable. It was laughable, but it still happens. You know, the witch hunts are not over.
No, they're not over. I remember reading about, so like there's still throughout many places in the States, all of these laws about selling witchcraft, doing and practicing tarot, selling fortune telling. And I was
Yeah.
reading this thing where there was this one woman, I can't remember which state she was in, but she had a witchcraft shop in a small evangelical town, and the evangelical sheriff was trying to force her out of the town and was
Mm.
using these laws. And it's like, you know, this stuff still happens where they're going after people for witchcraft, and you're just like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, it was
You know,
in
it's
Queensland.
ridiculous.
Here in Australia, it was called the Witchcraft, Vagrancy and Tarot Act, and it was
Oh,
still
great.
valid until 2000. And the way it got abolished was I was working at a psychic fair, which was run by a beautiful Jewish couple, and they did a raid on this psychic fair and arrested everybody and accused them under the Witchcraft, Vagrancy and Tarot Act. And he got it thrown out, not because of we have the right to practice whatever our deeply held beliefs. No, he got it thrown out because it was restrictive business practice. So, and that got the law changed in Queensland. So there you go.
Wow. But you know, we have so many famous poisoners. I always think too, when I think about like famous poisoners, we got to talk about the greatest Roman poisoner, Locusta, right? The woman who worked for Agrippina the Younger, probably, you know, the most powerful woman in Roman history, arguably one of the most powerful women ever. You know, she made Emperor Nero. Wild stuff there, you know. So this is a theme that we see, right? It's also just about, you know, marginalized people who don't have the power or the physical strength. And this is usually where women find themselves. They have to adapt. They have to use different methods. So poison becomes a method in which they have the power and the control that they can defeat that masculine force, right? Or that overpressing force, that dominating power, right?
It was so good actually when this came out, when they the poisoner was arrested and it was known it was such a they reckon that the men started treating their wives much better. There's poems about it, like, you know, be sweet to your wife, you know, or
she'll poison you.
Yeah. These little poisons, these little poems came out about how you must be nice to your wife, or else you know don't think you can be mean to her because she can poison you. Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. Oh, what do we got here? Caravaggio, Dion. Medusa.
Yes, yeah, this is from 1597, Caravaggio, because that'll set the tone for the next person I want to investigate, which is Artemisia Gentileschi, which was an Italian painter. This lady, whose father studied with Caravaggio, so she would help clean her father's brushes and apprentice with her father. So by the time she was 17, she was already good enough to paint to get commissions. And she became famous. Go to the next image. Yeah, here is her self-portrait of her as Saint Catherine of Alexandria, because something happened to her when she was 17. A group of people conspired to rape her. A famous painter named Agostino Tosi, a woman that was her nanny, because she was only 17 at the time and her father would be gone painting. She had to have someone to take care of her. And that woman, along with the local bishop and a famous Italian painter, conspired to rape her. Right. And when it got found out, they tortured her until they finally figured out that the guy actually did it. And they put him under what's called the Sibyl, where they put your fingers in this little vice and squeeze it together. And it's the Sibyl's the oracle. So basically it's a torture device called the oracle. And after this experience, she bounced back. And and part of the art, what's the style? Do you know the style that Caravaggio, the shadow painting?
Yeah, chiaroscuro.
Chiaroscuro. Yeah, and so she also understood that as well. Because shadow painting it fits in with the Goth theme, you know. Absolutely. The difference between, you know, using the shadow to express something. And so from this moment onwards, she did a series of paintings that were based on female martyrs.
Right.
And so here she's Saint Catherine. And with that wheel, you see that wheel right there? The Hecatean wheel, the Catherine's wheel.
Fortuna, right? Like,
yeah.
Catherine, when you look at the iconography, especially like a lot of her Orthodox Christian icons, she just looks like Fortuna. She looks like Tai Chi, right? The goddess of fortune, you know. But her story is a wild one, you know. It's a myth, but and it's largely not true. But you know, you can read about it in the hagiographies. But her story, right? Catherine is under of Alexandria, right? She has a vision of the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus, and she becomes a Christian, you know. And then when Emperor Maxentius starts like basically going in after all of the Christians, she goes to this great debate, and the story is that she's supposed to debate like 50 different academics, right? And she beats all the pagan academics and proves the authority of Christianity. And for this reason, she's thrown in prison and is tortured. And eventually the torture gets to the point where like they're trying to make her repent and she refuses to repent. So they're going to strap her to this wheel, right? And as soon as they put her on the wheel cracks in half and it breaks. And at that point, the emperor freaks out. He's like, okay, we can't get her to recount her faith. We're just going to decapitate her. So they order her head to be cut off. And then when they cut her head off, hagiography tells us that milk pours out and not blood. And then what ends up happening is a year later, after the death, Maxentius, he winds up being decapitated. And the Christians took this as a sign of her sainthood, as one of her miracles, that he was later decapitated. So what ends up happening with him is Constantine decides he's going to become the new emperor and take over, and his men throw Maxentius into a river and cut his head off and parade it through the streets. Well, the Christians saw this as divine retribution by the Saint Constantine, you know? So that's the story of Catherine. But, you know, it's this deeply occulted magical image. And like Caravaggio, right, which she studied under to a certain degree, also does a really famous image of St. Catherine of the Wheel, right?
Yeah, this is a theme. And she, like I said, she bounced back and she started receiving patronage from the Medicis out of Florence. She goes to Florence and she goes to court and she draws more paintings. Go to the next one because they're important to discuss. Here she's this is Judith of Holofernes in the Bible. And Holofernes in the Bible, Judith has to sneak in and pretend, and she cuts off the head of this king that wants to kill the tribe. And there's more to this painting, more to the story. Her name is Artemisia. She identified with Artemis to a certain extent after the rape. If you go to the next image, and this is a close-up, and this is of the same painting. This is a close-up of Judith's arm in the painting, and it's a Artemis bracelet.
Wow. Yeah, you can see right in the center. These are well described in the PGM, and we have thousands of them that have survived. These kind of gems. It's usually Hecate, but sometimes you get Diana.
Yeah, and so she's identifying with these martyrs, with Judith, the beheader. She identifies with Saint Catherine, who got beheaded, and then the head is later beheaded of the antagonist of that story. And here she's identifying with Artemis, and that's why I was talking about. Artemis is one of the sub themes of the strong woman in the forest with the dog, and so Judith was an excellent painter. You know, go to the next image, because this is right here.
Is that the wrong image, or is this the? Are you there, Dion?
We've lost him.
We've lost him.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm back now. I'm back now.
Yeah.
And so
is that Mathilde?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, is that Mathilde? I was going to say.
Yeah. If I think it is this picture, because it got skipped in order, and you could see though there's a head at the bottom.
Yeah.
That image of the head at the bottom of with Catherine. And there's another Catherine that had another beheading. That was Catherine the Great. We talk about Catherine the Great in other episodes. Well, Peter the Great decapitated one of her lovers and pickled his head in a jar and would leave it in their room at night sometimes
Jesus.
to warn her about cheating. And this is funny because the beheading myth, we talked about the head in Salome. The head in
Your
Judas.
head, Joachim.
Yes. Yep. And the head of Brahm, the head of Brahm in England, it was buried at the tower, and you could prophesize with it. Well, King Henry VIII had his wife beheaded, Catherine Howard, and in the Tower of London. There is this theme of beheading and with women. yes. Like we were talking about Marie Antoinette. Yeah, off with your head. It's the power center of for some people, the head has power. And there's some people that have kept their lovers' heads around for years.
Well, this is a deeply magical thing. We kind of talked about this a bit, right? Like, we see this within the PGM, right? One of the central spells in the PGM is the Stella of Jew, which later then becomes rewritten by Crowley, and the Golden Dawn is the Headless Rite, right? And this is the shattering of the ego and the going through the process of divine imitation, right? To have that hidden God be in possession of the body. But this is such a profound thing, right? This is a true initiation and a transformation, right? So there's that whole thing about losing your head, right? And giving up your head. The goddess is going to demand your head. She's going to demand your masculinity, right? This, again, we're going back to that imagery of Attis. In order to go through the divine imitation, you have to lose your ego. You have to pass through the gates of fear and go into that process of loving imitation, where you become enthused and embody the spirit of another, right?
At the Tower of London, there's a beautiful glass memorial to both Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, who were cousins, right? At the Tower of London, where they're buried. And you go there, and there's so many women sitting there just meditating, where their remains are. It's beautiful. And while I was sitting there with my girlfriend, the ravens from the tower came down and sat with us. Like, they will sit, but you're not supposed to touch them. But they were jumping all over us, and we were feeding them. And the guardians of the tower were like, "That doesn't usually happen." That doesn't usually happen. But yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful glass memorial to these beheaded women. So it's lovely, actually. And women go there and meditate and sit there. Yeah.
Yes, there's a sub theme through history with the Catherine archetype, and off with your head. Oh, here we are. Oh, Elizabeth Bathory.
Oh gosh. Elizabeth Bathory, right?
Wearing all black.
A naughty Hungarian.
Oh,
this is one of those ones, right, where like modern historians are so divided on her.
Yeah.
When you go and you dive deep, like when I started to do the research, it's very clear that her husband was a very notorious rake and was very abusive and horrific to his peasants. The question is, how horrific was she, and did she continue the practices? The issue with this is that we're dealing at a time where, after her husband dies, Bathory becomes the largest landholder in all of Hungary and becomes one of the most powerful nobles. And what ends up happening is the people who accuse her take her land and then become the great landholders. So there's all of this accusation about what actually went down, So I do believe, and most scholars do believe, there was a lot of extreme abuse and decadence, right? But most of it seems to have happened at the hands of her husband. It probably did continue under her, but it seems like a lot of that stuff, like bathing in the blood of the virgins, and the rapes, that seems to have been extremely, that seems to be satire for the purpose of stealing her power.
Yeah, satanic panic again. There's something there. There's something there. I mean, even if you look at her hands in this portrait, it's quite famous. Try and count the number of fingers. The hands.
Yeah, 6.
Right. So
Mm.
does she have an extra one, or is there one missing? It's not quite
Oh,
right. It's like an early example of, AI portraiture, that's
Right.
not quite right with the hands. But yeah, it's unusual. But and I think even by this portrait, they're saying something's not quite right there. There does, I think that there's certainly lesbian overtones to her story.
Yes.
because
And
they
I
were
think,
young girls,
yes,
sexualized. Yeah.
yeah. And whether or not she was bathing in their menstrual blood, or whether it was, but there was something going on there. There was something, because she was walled up as a criminal, right?
She
So
was, and she did
yeah,
die in her castle, and
yeah,
you can't just do that to someone, you
yeah.
know? And
So
Well,
there
was
is
she
evidence
sexual?
that her husband was raping and murdering his constituents, his
Yes,
peasantry. Not
but
so much of her, though.
yeah, but
yeah,
the sheer numbers again that they say that she did,
It's
would
it's
have
it's
severely
ridiculous,
depopulated the
their little
countryside.
right? It's
village. Yeah,
ridiculous.
Yeah,
It's
they'd have
ridiculous.
no
It's
more
like,
farmers. So
no, it
here's the
would
thing:
never
yeah,
have happened like that.
yeah.
there is an alchemical mystery rite that could have taken place if we take the myth and say, "Oh, it's true." Okay, she was bathing in blood. Could that do something for somebody?
Mm,
Could the girls have been fed a specific diet, and then that blood now has been bioprocessed? Is their
mhm.
blood or their menstrual fluid now contain psychedelic or whatever type of pharmacological properties?
Oh,
There, so
Nero had to do it with the Vestal virgins. That's why they had to stay virgins, because they,
vegetables, right,
yeah,
right. So, but if we feed someone something, their blood gets psychoactive, and it's contained in their blood, so we can get high off their blood. I'm not saying she did it, but I'm saying that there is a alchemical mystery, right, that is in that literature that somebody would recognize.
Well,
mhm,
that's where the satanic panic also comes in, because right, this is something that society is aware of, but yet not aware of, right? It's
mhm,
it's underpinning, right? Christianity is here, so everyone knows this kind of thing, and so it becomes that great, fearful other. We
mhm,
want to. It's the narcissism of small difference.
mhm,
Pay no attention to what we're doing. Look at what they're doing,
mhm,
and they're doing what we're actually doing. It's this whole thing. We're abusing
mhm,
the Catholic Church, especially, right? They're
mhm,
abusing these children, and we have all of this documented evidence. If anyone wants to read it, go read Amon's book, Original Sin, where he's
mhm,
going through these texts and he just lays it out for you. They're abducting these orphan children off the streets, and they're doing these ridiculous rites. Now, could she have been doing the same thing? Yes, she could have. Could she have done that to 800 people?
Hell no.
No, right? And this is where things get wild, right? It's like how, and also, was she doing it, or were there other nobles accusing her of doing it who are actually doing
Right.
it?
And then
you
took
know,
her land from her and took
yeah,
her land
right?
from her because there were other people at that time that were doing wild things. Go to the next image.
All of these nobles are debaucherous and corrupt, right? For the most part. And they have this ability to get away with stuff that we can't imagine. That was the other thing I wanted to, when we were talking about earlier with the Hellfireclub. One of the
mhm,
wild things about, you're dealing with the most extreme wealth and power imaginable.
mhm,
The rape master general was the rape master general because of that level of power that these men
mhm.
were able to wield. And it's freaking, that kind of power corrupts and brings out wildness. So yeah.
Yeah, I know it's a thing for me. I like, there's this equality thing that, like, you're not evil because you've got money, and
No,
a lot of people with money do a lot of good things, but whether
absolutely.
you're poor or whether you're wealthy, if you've done the wrong thing, you've done the wrong thing.
No, for
It's not.
sure. But I
Yeah.
just mean that you have, right? Power allows for
Hmm.
the ability to get away with stuff, right?
Hmm.
For the ability to do these kinds of things,
So does
and we have to.
autonomy and homelessness. So, I mean, it is a
Mhm.
generalization just to pin that on the wealthy. I'm not.
I don't know
I'm
though,
not.
but also, like, we live in a society, a capitalist society, where in order to
Yeah.
become a billionaire, you cannot become one without exploitation, without
Mhm.
without without that kind of level of it's just impossible in our modern society. There
Mhm.
you can't have these kind of, like, I'm not saying you're a terrible person, but you're definitely got blood on your hands if you're a billionaire. And if you're a noble, you got blood on your hands because you're a noble, right? There's a certain thing with that kind of affluence, right?
Yeah.
It's just all of us in the West, we get to live in a level of luxury that other people don't because of imperialism, and it's just a reality, that we have to confront and face.
Yeah, I don't know. I understand what you're saying, and there are people like that, but it's a generalization to say it's all. Like,
I'm not saying it's all. I never once claimed it was all, but I'm saying that there is this. I mean, okay, I will say, like, billionaires, when you're talking about billions and individuals who wield that kind of power, this kind of level of extreme power, it's you just can't wield that power without hurting someone. It's an impossibility.
Well, did we lose Dion? Have we said something that's upset him? Is he
gone?
Oh,
no. We wouldn't have said anything that would upset him. No way.
Oh, good.
No way.
Oh, good. And I think it's great to have these debates. I really do. I think we've got to have these discussions because there is so much out there that's saying, like honestly, I know billionaires that have created value, and their wealth has come from the creation of value, not the exploitation of others. So, there is that. And I have worked very intimately with a gentleman who's created so much value in Australia. That's where his money comes from. It's not from exploiting others. And the people that work for him are wealthy because they work for him. And he takes
but it's
care
the
of
nature
them.
of the capital system in general. You cannot exist within this current system without just us. We here as Westerners, we live and get to enjoy the fruits of wealth at the exploitation of the rest of the world. It's just a reality. And a billionaire, it's up to the nth degree now, and you have an obligation when you wield that kind of power, to society. And I don't know. Anyway, we should continue.
I know. Yeah, but I've been to India, and everybody in India's got a mobile phone, no matter what level they're from.
Yeah, but because that's but that's also just a different, because of the way that they've been able to manage their culture, and because capital is willing to shift things and make it cheaper. If all of a sudden us in the West couldn't afford cell phones would be much cheaper.
So who's getting exploited then? We are in the West. So
yes and no.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, the West, the system of imperial capitalism exists to serve the billionaire class, right? And we get trickle down benefits from it as working people, and we also get exploited by it by working people. We're not exempt from that exploitation, but we can't also deny the level of wealth and prosperity that we live in. It's just a fact of reality. Anyone who lives in the West, in Australia or North America, is living infinitely better than anyone in India, and has a lot more wealth and free capital and freedom of movement. And that is a result of imperial colonial power and the exploitation of others, right?
There's a lot of wealthy Indian people that I know.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of wealthy Indian people. I'm not saying that, but all of this kind of wealth, all of this power is generated through this insane capital system. I always go back to the ancient Greeks, and I always, what did Socrates say? What did Numa say? They said that it was the desire for commodity that led to imperialism, and that it is this obsession with the creation of commodity and pleasure that leads to all of this insane decadence. And it's just something that's proven time and time again. In the ancient Greek times, it was the spice trade. In early America, it was the sugar trade. In our time, it is the oil trade, but whatever commodity we need and want will justify the destruction of the other, and I don't, do we blame the person who's eating sugar at the, at the end of the day, if we didn't desire all that sugar, we wouldn't have had the slave trade. It's just, it gets all complicated.
Yeah, but I've written like a lecture on morals, right, and ethics, and these groups, these people that consume other people, right? If it becomes a cannibalistic society, which is what you're talking about, this is the basis of all of our ethics. A society that consumes itself cannot survive. Right? And you'll find that the billionaires that work on self-consumption of people, they don't survive. The ones that actually
Right.
go out and go, we've got to strengthen society, we've got to make it better, we've got to improve the lives of these people, we've got to take it further. And there are responsible ones out there that do see this as a whole picture of improving, creating value and wealth for everybody within their chain. Then those ones do prosper. They do survive. They're in it for the long term, not the short term. Yeah. So there are two sides of it.
I mean, it's just like, we see this again, though, right? Like, it is the king that resists change that eventually consumes their children, right? And it's it is the billionaire, rich, noble class that does this, and this is in the great poetic cycles, right? Where that youth has to rise up and overthrow the decadent, corrupted tyrant. And this is the Greeks call it, what is it? Proxylea, where it's this idea of greed, but greed that reduces people to objects.
Yeah,
right?
we had an Indigenous group here in Australia that was like there's 40 odd Indigenous nations here that base their Indigenous nation on ritual cannibalism and fear, right? And they ended up consuming themselves. They weren't billionaires. You can get cavemen that start eating their own children. They're not going to be around for very long because there is no future generation.
No, but what is the ultimate ideal here? What are we talking about here? When we're getting in, why does the king consume his children? Because he is trying to stop time and empower himself. He's trying to be the dictator and the tyrant. And if we look at the vast majority of billionaires, how do they behave and act? You can't say this about, you cannot say that someone like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel is not behaving in that decadent, extreme way where they're trying to dominate the world, right? You can't say that about Bill Gates either. Right?
No, there's a certain multi-millionaire at the moment who's openly on the internet drinking his son's blood.
Right.
And I think,
right.
Yeah.
So we do. This is what. But my point I was trying to make is like that this kind of level of wealth allows for this insanity. Right.
Yeah.
There would probably be a lot of poor people who would do this kind of stuff too if they could get away with it, or
And
if they had the means.
They do.
They try. Right. Some do. Some do. Right.
Yeah.
But like. What I mean is, like, you can't have, none of this kind of crazy ritualized decadence, right? This is happening within the aristocracy, right? That doesn't mean that the poor aren't committing their own kinds of crimes. It's just a different kind of crime, right? And it may even be for the same reasons, right? But it doesn't appear in this kind of ridiculous, pompous way.
Yeah,
and
it's more offensive when it's ridiculously pompous,
right? Well, and it becomes mythologized, and it becomes this whole thing, right? When people put it in your face like that, and but
cool.
Well, we lost Dion.
Very interesting debate, really is for another time.
It is. Well, there's a lot to be, and at the end of the day, it's all just ideas, nothing but love here, right?
Yeah.
But Elizabeth Bathory is a wild character,
Yeah.
There's so much going on here. Oh gosh. So Dion has us talking about Bruno, Giordano Bruno. Are you familiar with Bruno at all?
Yeah. I mean, in his own way, he became, he was burnt at his own stake in a way, wasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, he was, Giordano Bruno is so important because they're this incredible translator, right? They help become one of the main architects of the Renaissance. They're up there with Gemistos Plethon, right? As these really hugely important intellectual figures. His main contribution, right, is he translates the Hermetic texts and Plato for the Medicis. And this is one of the key moments that defines the Renaissance. But he also does get, as you pointed out, burned at the stake by the Catholic Church because he was a radical pagan, and openly so. And this is such a wild time because it's like in Italy at this early part of the Renaissance, we're really seeing this revolution come about. And Giordano is the attempt to try and stop it. The Catholic Church is trying to stop it because, 25 years before Giordano comes, you have Gemistos Plethon coming from Byzantium, and he hooks up with the Medicis and he builds the first schools of the Renaissance. Then you get Giordano Bruno translating stuff. You also get Petrarch, who starts translating Cicero. And by then, now the Renaissance is in full bloom. There's this whole revitalization of philosophy, and people are reading again. And we got to remember, like at that point in the Middle Ages, right, the Catholic Church had held, throughout the collapse of Rome, it was such a long, beleaguered, and violent process. And the church had such a, I don't necessarily agree with the Dark Ages portrayal, but we can't deny this extreme religious orthodoxy that tried to wipe out all knowledge that wasn't it. That did happen. It didn't last for very long, about 100, 200 years max, but it did happen,
Yeah, well, I think we still suffer a bit from that today as well. I mean, there is a narrative, and if you're against the narrative, it's certainly not going to hit the algorithms.
Right.
There is a certain suppression of knowledge and information out there.
Well, we see that the internet, right? The internet is not it's wild to me, because it's the best of places and the worst. For the first time in human history, we have access to information in a way that we can't imagine. We can get access to a lot of these classical texts and stuff that we couldn't ever before. But at the same time, all of that information is curated and is sent to us from a very deliberate perspective. And if we get to see other perspectives, if they get too popular, they either get folded into the mainstream perspective or they are silenced, right? Yeah. And this is just how it is. And it's only gotten worse because of like we watched it happen in our lifetimes, from the George Bush Iraq War until now. It's like we've seen this absolute degradation of the freedom of speech in mainstream media, and this absolute collusion of ideas, and it has become to the point where it's like, are you even doing journalism? You're not even like a lot of these mainstream news, they're not even answering the basics of journalism. They don't provide you with both sides of a situation.
Exactly.
Like, take, for example, something like the Ukrainian-Russian war, I try to avoid a lot of this stuff. And then eventually I had to go do my deep dive and my research. But when I first heard about this, right, I had that lens of propaganda flashed upon me, where it's like, this war happened when Russia invaded and took Crimea, and this is just the defense of Ukraine kind of thing. And it is so much more complicated than that. It is so much infinitely more like, I'm not picking sides, and I'm not trying to get into right or wrong here. I'm just trying to say the narrative that I was presented, that NATO narrative, it doesn't show us the other side, right? Regardless,
all the 500 years of history that's led to this point.
That's led to that point. And it's like, regardless of what you think about the Russians, they have a perspective that we need to hear, and we need to listen and try to understand. How can we come to any kind of agreement and end any kind of war if you don't even know what the other side is saying? If you just have this Russophobia, it's become absolutely insane to me, but this is the mainstream media.
100% agree. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like I was trying to help a friend do an investigation into a murder that happened in the 90s. There was, you can't find, because it's considered sealed, done. It's in the archives. It's really hard to find the old news stories and things like that. So it's on a large scale as well as a small scale. They don't want their narrative challenged, whether it's in one court case or nations. So
right, exactly. Or like Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia because you can get so much information, but how? It's all about how you present information, right? Like you can, I was looking up, you look up some people, and then all of a sudden, how do they frame who they are? Well, this person was accused of this, right? I read a Wikipedia article where it opens up with this. This person was accused. They went to court. They were found innocent. But the Wikipedia article says, but yeah, they were accused of that. So you're leading your audience to assume that this person is a criminal, right? And it's like,
I just did a documentary video on L.W. de Lawrence and his publishing company in the US, and the Wikipedia article is a witch hunt. It really is. It just goes, oh, he did all these things wrong, and then in the end, it says, like, it's almost like a footnote, but it was dismissed, and there was no wrong. It was a witch hunt in those days because of race. You know, he
Right.
was one of the first churches that was admitting black people equally to white people against the law at that stage, and publishing works by people from all around the world. So yeah, he must have been a bad guy, but Wikipedia is still reflecting that today. You know,
Right.
it's
This is
very
the
sad to see. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all manipulated by these big, by these big interests,
Mhm.
and it's just frustrating,
Mhm.
because and it's going to start to double down in a more insane way. Like, one of the things that just kind of just shocked me, okay? A friend of
Mhm.
mine sent me I know we're going off in a diatribe, but whatever. A friend of mine sent me this video with Hillary Clinton, and you know, I don't really think about her at all, but she said something that was just absolutely just egregious to me, which was that she was saying that we've lost the young people because the young people are propagandized by TikTok. They get to see the atrocities that are happening in Israel, and therefore they no longer are believing our propaganda. So her whole thing that she was trying to argue is we need to control the internet and control what our kids think and see. And I'm just like, this is the most evil kind of stuff. You're trying to tell people not to believe their eyes, and you're trying to keep them from witnessing reality. And
Yeah,
you phrase this as the moral position, you
yeah.
know?
We've got a law getting passed. It's passed, and by December 10th in Australia, if you're under 18, that you cannot access social media, including YouTube and things like that. So they're actually going to stop. I think it's under 16. If they're under 16, they're not allowed to access. So all these people with YouTube and TikTok accounts are going to lose their accounts if they're under 16.
And it's all this fear monger. It's always about protect the children, protect their morals, protect their values. And like, don't get me wrong, social media can be a bloody cancer, and it can mess people up, but it can also give you so much access to information, and it can
Yes.
show you different perspectives all across the world. I'm
Yeah,
here
it's a bit-
talking to you in Australia because of
I
YouTube,
know.
right?
I know. It's a bit late to try and close the gate after the horse has bolted. I mean,
Right.
there's been a generation of kids that have grown up with this, and they're okay.
Exactly. This is what I mean. It's the same
This
kind
is
of fear
again
mongering about video games or
the
or
four tenets
movies.
of propaganda again.
Yeah.
There's atrocities. They're drinking blood. They're sacrificing our children. They're undermining society. It's not good for us. We've got to control it. The children and the sacrifice are always there. May not
Stick
be
your head
literal.
in the sand and listen to what we tell you and accept it.
Yeah.
Don't think for yourself. Don't go out and try to learn. And it's what I love about this kind of Renaissance stuff when we look at people like Giordano Bruno, and what's so incredible, and what I as much as we have access to information and we have all of this incredible affluence and ability to we have time that the people of the past didn't. We have tools and access that they didn't. Why don't we see these brilliant polyglots like Bruno, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't we seeing a flourishing of knowledge? And it's because most of us are wasting our time in distraction and in consumption. It's like, and I mean, we're all guilty of this to a certain extent. That's life. We don't want to live a life of of study, but at the
Monastic
same
life.
time,
A monastic life.
but at the same time, it's just like, with all of these grand breakthroughs in technology, it's almost always we lose something too, right?
Yeah.
We gain the ability to have all of this stuff, be fed to us, and now our kids aren't reading and writing.
Yeah, they're using AI instead of doing their submissions themselves. But he died for this, to show everybody without recanting that we have the right to all information.
Yep. And that's what's so beautiful. We have
and he should become a saint for that.
Absolutely.
The freedom of information saint.
Right?
That's what he should be. Yeah.
Because what did he do? All he did was translate books, like share ideas. And this is this thing that, people always get so caught up and angry. And I'm just like, take a step back. Are people expressing ideas, or are they doing something? There's a big difference between an action and an idea. And, I'm not saying that we don't want to challenge bad ideas, but there's a difference between challenging an idea and challenging an action. You know, we don't need to suppress ideas in the same way we need to suppress bad action, you know?
Yeah. And they would have let him live if he recanted it all, you know, and he was just like, no, get stuffed. This needs to be out there. You
Then
know?
he becomes this patron saint of the occult. You know, I
Yeah.
just remember a couple years ago, there was this guy in Mexico who did this whole big meme thing, and it showed up on my feed because he paid like a bunch of these artists to reconstruct this whole Bruno shrine, and then had people convinced that he was going to be the next Bruno, and he was going to release this book that was going to be this big occult revelation. And then it comes out that he was just a rich kid. He didn't actually write much, and what he did write was drivel. But you know, my point though is this image though still had the power to become a meme and get everyone interested in 2024. You know?
Yeah, yeah. And then if you don't know who Bruno is, please go do some research on him, because we owe him a lot. We owe him a lot.
Yeah. One of the key figures of the Renaissance, right? We wouldn't have the Hermetic works without him, right? You know, those works almost got lost. Like, this is what people fail to understand. It's like a couple years later, they may not have survived because the Hermetic tradition within the Christian world had become completely despised and was rejected, right? Because of this idea, you know, we understand, right? Because we're familiar with the tradition, but that idea within the tradition that you take on the figurehead of Hermes and you write from that God perspective, it delegitimized so much of the literature within the popular society, you know, of the Christian world. And it allowed them to try and say, well, this Hermes isn't a real guy, so none of these books are real and none of this information is real.
What was the name of the guy that the Catholic Church paid to actually tear it down? Not Theodosius. Again, something I'll put in the comments for you under the video.
Appreciate it.
But yeah, but he was paid to actually go and attack it. You know, it was like to say it was all delegitimatized and all that sort of stuff. And then we get, like, we've got the Hermetica, which survives, you know, the Corpus Hermetica, which survives because of him. And then we get the Theosophical Society with the later edition of the Seven Principles, the Seven Hermetic Principles. Right. So, yeah, and the two today even become conflated, and it's two separate things.
Yeah, the Kabbalion, all that later tradition. Yeah, a lot of people, because of Blavatsky. Yeah. No, it's not classic Hermeticism, but it is inspired by Hermetic principle.
Exactly.
Right.
And on that ground, it's probably a later, but the two do get conflated. You know, it is that later taking on that persona, and I'm going to write under that persona. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, you know, but these are also the traditions evolve and they morph and they conflate. You know, it's the same thing. Like, you know, I've talked to some people who got, you know, they're like snappy, you know, that conflation of Persephone, Hecate, Diana, and Artemis. That's a later thing. How can you do that? And I'm like, but it's also an accurate thing within the tradition.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. They were always looking. I mean, I think it's the thing with humans. We're always looking for that connection between cultures. Oh, yeah, you worship that god. Hey, that's like my god. Yeah, we're always looking for that connection, and it very much happened in ancient Rome as well as ancient Greece. You know, when they were bringing in the mother from the east and things like that. So
there's all this cultural exchange, right? Like when you start to study this, you clearly see Dionysus is probably a foreign god. Right. He originates in Phrygia. He comes over and then he becomes a central Greek figure. But he has this outsider foreignness to him. And that's essential to his character. Right. And this becomes a divine thing. So, of course, why wouldn't they see it reflect? Also, it's like cultures are this constantly evolving, building thing. It's like Greece is building on the backs of ancient Pelasgians, is building the Sumerians, the Babylonians, of the Egyptians. Like, all of that is coming in. All of that is related, you know, and who knows what the Egyptians are building off of, right? Like, we have this mysterious deep past that is lost too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting.
So do you think Dion, he's
I think he's
available?
done.
Yeah.
So maybe we should, what do we got? Maybe we should, we're coming up to 2.5 hours here. Maybe we should call it.
It feels like
Dion
5
is done.
minutes. It feels like 5 minutes. But yeah, maybe we can continue this next Monday with Dion. And
Yeah, next Sunday, yeah, or Monday.
yeah,
for
not
you.
get so, off on digressions.
Right. Amazing. Yeah, this has been so much fun. I just love chatting
Yeah.
with you. You know?
Yeah, but digressions are good. And and please, if you're listening to us and you've liked any of our little digressions where we've gone off on different tangents and you want us to talk more about those tangents, please let us know. Because
Absolutely.
we're good at that.
Yeah, and we definitely want to come back and do another episode to finish this up. And I would love it. We wanted to ask you, Shay, Dion, and I, if you wanted to join us for our next series where we're going to look into all of the witches who have been burned. Since you wrote a book, I didn't realize you wrote a book about it starting at the end,
Cool.
but
Yeah,
we want to
cool.
go to the beginning.
Yeah, it's cool. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Witch? And we go through the majority of things that, the misconceptions about witches, but we go into deep dives with the lunations and the different astrological things that we use. And so it's just like witchcraft in a nutshell, but it's like it started out as a textbook for my classes. And so all my PowerPoints sort of put together and articles from the magazine and all that sort of thing. So it's a good little, if you want to get serious about the craft of the wise and understand the science behind it and what's true and what's not, it's a good place to start.
Love it. I'll have to check that out. But yeah, thank you guys all for tuning in, for watching us. Make sure you go check out Shay. Her channel is Magic Magazine, and you can find all of the links in the description below. And make sure you go check out Dion, the Occult Barbershop, as well. And we will be back next week with another deep dive into the goth culture, and we'll be diving into the witch burnings as well. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Maybe we might get to the end of the presentation this time.
Yes. Right. Beautiful. Anything you want to promote or any last words for our audience before we leave here?
No, if they want a little bit more info about the Hellfireclub, I'm sure we'll put up a link for that video, and that will show you some of the images from inside the Hellfire Caves itself. We did a little invocation in there and got a few transparent things that popped up behind us. So it's quite interesting what happened there. And we've got some recordings that they've actually, when you walk through the caves, they've got recordings in the cave that explain some of the history to you. So we put those in there as well.
Oh, beautiful.
So it's a nice little, like, if you're more interested in the Hellfireclub, you'll find some interesting stuff there.
All right. Well, make sure, guys, go check that out. Magic Magazine, see her video on the Hellfireclub. And with that, thank you guys so much for joining us. Peace and love, and tune in next week for more Occult Explorers. All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.